and I can't remember what verse it is, but where it says the passing of the cup, not your will, my will.
Matthew
When they say
26, 39 to 44. Matthew 26, 39 to 44.
yeah, so if Jesus' will and God will is the same, how do I explain him saying not my will and your will, their will supposed to be the same?
I don't know what you
How would
mean.
I explain?
What do you mean?
Like Jesus' will and the Father will is the same because they're the
Well, yeah.
same in essence, right?
The essence is not identical to will, right? So you're confusing categories. So you got to explain to me what you mean by will.
So does the Father and the Son have the same will?
Now you're asking a question that has divided Christians throughout the centuries. So how do you want me to answer?
Which the scripturally, the truth.
Well, where does the scripture articulate and spell out the function of the will? Is it because of the nature someone has, or is it because you're a person? You're asking questions the Bible doesn't address. That's why Christians were debating these issues to try to make sense of what the Bible teaches, because the Bible is not a theological work. It's not a systematic theology where it systematizes what you're supposed to believe and explains it. So how do you want me to answer the question?
I guess give both you guys best interpretation of it then,
Okay.
I'm guessing.
Number one, depending on which Christian you ask, see, I got to be fair. I can't alienate one group over another because you have what we call the Oriental Orthodox, and they've been around from time immemorial. They've been around from the start, and they hold to what's called miaphysitism, technical term meaning that they believe that after Christ became flesh, the divine and human natures of Christ form one composite nature. So it's a composite nature, and he has a composite will. And so they understand will differently from the Orthodox, the Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and Catholics and Protestants. So if you ask me, does Jesus have one will or two wills? Because remember, Jesus is God and man, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if he has two natures, does he have two wills? Well, the Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestants, not all Protestants, will answer yes. Because he has a divine nature, he has a divine will, and a human nature, he has a human will. So here, it's Jesus referring to his human will, which he's going to bring in perfect submission to the Father's will, the divine will. That's how they're answered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're not the same person, and Jesus has human nature, and having more than one nature means he has more than one will, then he has two wills, right? A divine will and human will?
Yeah.
You're like struggling.
Yeah, because this is something I've been trying to figure out for the past.
Exactly. Good job figuring it out. They've been trying to figure it out for 2,000 years. But anyway, coming back to the issue, if we assume that having a will is a characteristic of the nature that you have. For example, if you have human nature, then part of human nature is to have a human will, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you assume that. So if Jesus has a human nature, then he has what?
If he has a human nature,
then he has what?
He has a human will.
But if he has a divine nature, then he has what?
A divine will.
So now you said he has two wills. You see my point?
Yeah.
So those who believe he has two wills because he has two natures will say, because Jesus is truly human, he is now bringing his human will in perfect submission to the divine will.
Okay.
Right?
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay, but now, what if you don't believe that Christ has two wills? For example, let's say the will that you have is because you're a person, meaning only persons have wills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rocks don't have wills, do they?
Right.
My cup doesn't have a will, right?
Uh-uh.
My cup doesn't have a will. Does it have a will?
No.
Okay. So that means persons have a will, right? Yeah. For you to have a will, that means you're a person, correct?
Yes.
So how many persons is Jesus?
One.
So they'll say, because Jesus is one person, he has one will. Right?
Right. And isn't that the will of the Father?
Well, if the Father is a different person, then he has his own will, and the Spirit is a different person, and he has his own will, But because they're inseparable, their wills will never conflict and collide. They'll always work in perfect union. And they'll say this prayer is an example of it. Though the Son has his own will, because he's perfectly, inseparably united to the Father, he will never seek to oppose the Father's will, but always come in perfect submission to the Father's will, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now let me take it a third step. If they have one will, because they have one nature, right? Let's go there. Then if they have one will because they have one nature, well, doesn't it show they have two wills? No, because read it better. Let's now go a little deeper. You can read this to mean, oh, I thought you had it on the screen. You're dropping the ball, bro.
You wasn't ready for it.
I'm gonna have to get you like shut down, bro.
You wasn't ready for it.
All right. I'm looking at it because I'm thinking he's seeing it. All right. Matthew 26, 44, down here. And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, if my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. They'll say that actually shows they don't have different wills, because Jesus is saying, your will is my will, and my will is your will. That's why he's saying, not my will, but your will, because your will is my will.
Okay.
You see how complex it gets?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not easy.
That's
But
why
have
we got
your
guys
hands-
like y'all to help us.
Say, go ahead.
I said that's why we got people like y'all to help us.
Believe me, I'm not fully understanding the issues because there are too many because these are the issues that separated your church. If you read church history, now you got a guy who's calling himself bastard. If you read church history, you're going to see the churches that were united split over these issues. Starting in the 400s, 5th century, they actually split over these issues. Well, how many natures Christ has? Is it two natures or is it one composite nature? How many wills? Two wills or one? They split over these issues starting in the 400s.